Hey, this is Meredith Elliott Powell, and welcome to another episode of Sales Logic, the show where we dive into the strategies, discuss the steps, everything that you need to know to sell more effectively in today's marketplace. And I am here with my co-host, Mark Hunter. Hey, Mark, welcome to the show.
Welcome to the show. And we're a few minutes late because we were comparing temperatures. It's -2 where Meredith, quit laughing, please. It's sickening how nice you have it in Florida. So anyway, good morning. We're going to have a good show.
Well, there is something a little bit screwy about the fact that you live in Nebraska and you stay in Nebraska during the winter. I live in North Carolina where the winters aren't as bad, but I'm the one who escapes to Florida. But I'm just going to give you a brief overview of how the show works, and then Mark's going to dive into the details. So every week, and we've kind of landed on Saturday, as Saturday being our day, we start this show with a topic. We really dive into something that you need to know to really sell more effectively in today's marketplace. And my favorite part of the show is we answer a question from our viewers. So if you have a question at any point about anything you want to know about sales, just simply go to our website, saleslogicpodcast.com. That's saleslogicpodcast.com. Enter the question there, or just post it up on social media and just use hashtag sales logic. We then share a book that either we've been reading or something that we think would be really helpful for you. And we end with a lightning round, strategies that you can put into place immediately. So what's on topic for today, Mark?
Well, the topic today is sales goals and what are the right things to measure and what should salespeople not pay attention to. So that's the topic we're going to delve into. But before we get into the topic, we always take the question. The question today comes from Europe. It comes from Rania in Europe. She asks, I'm a small business owner and I do all the selling. What should I be using to measure to determine my success in sales? And I think we have to get beyond the logical thing, and that is, of course, revenue. So she's the owner. She's the kind of the salesperson. What should she be using to measure?
I think one of the first things that she needs to do as an owner, because this is a tough job. I mean, Mark, you and I have to do this too. We run our businesses, we have to deliver on our services, yet we have to find new business. And I think one of the first things that you need to measure is how much time you're going to devote to the selling process. One of the challenges with being an owner and the chief salesperson is you're pulled in a million different directions, and you need to carve out time every single day. In fact, put it early in the day. Make it a priority to sell first, because if not, the rest of the day is just going to happen to you and you're going to wind up having not made a sales call all day.
Well, see, that brings up a very good point, because so many small business owners, what they do is they rely on repeat business or business that just kind of comes their way. And they really never spend enough time truly out there creating. So one of the things I think she should be focused on is how much of her time, how much of her effort is really focused against creating new business.
That's a great one. I also think you need to clearly define what are the actions you're using for selling. I'm a big believer that you want to measure behaviors before you measure results. So define how you get business. Maybe what I'm looking for first is really you need to define your process so you can measure your process. Who's your ideal client? How do you find your ideal client? How do you engage with your ideal client? How do you create awareness in the marketplace? So really lay out and define your sales process so you can measure your sales process.
And understanding that ideal customer profile is so key. We've talked about that. We're both really honed in on that a lot. And one of the things that I see small business owners doing a lot is they kind of rely on networking. They rely on kind of their existing contacts. They rely on things that they are normally spending time on. And they think that is really selling. It's not selling. What that's doing is it's just building relationships. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but that's got a long tail. You really need to be focused. And I tell this to every small business owner. How many really new contacts are you establishing each week? And what's your process? Meredith, you've declared February as follow-up month. And again, that's something the small business owners got to do. They've got to be able to establish that new contact and follow up. So I'm going to say, measure your level of follow-up, your depth. your consistency of follow-up.
Mark, you bring up such a great point that most small business owners really use networking as a way to develop sales leads and contacts. So one of the things that you need to measure is are how are your networking opportunities turning into sales leads. One of the biggest mistakes I see with business owners, with sales professionals, is you're not networking in the right places. I'll use a great example of a client I had a few years ago who was really struggling to close deals. She was an investment advisor, and she didn't meet with anybody who didn't have at least $1 million to invest. Yet I found her networking at Chamber Business After Hours. Well, if you've ever been to a Chamber Business After Hours, it's not filled with people who have $1 million or more to invest. So you really need to start to measure where your networking events are. Are they aligned with your ideal customer avatar? And then how many leads are you generating from there?
And that runs counter to a lot of the philosophies of the small business, because they feel I'm a small business, so I'm operating in this physical community. My father owned a small business for a few years, and needless to say, his ideal customer profile, I wish I was old enough to have told him, Dad, you're not spending your time with your ideal customer profile, because you're spending your time with the Chamber of Commerce networking events, with the service clubs, all wonderful people, all wonderful, great, but they weren't his customers. And ultimately, the business did not succeed. And I think this is one of the big reasons why so many small businesses fail, because they don't stay focused on what their mission is and who they need to be delivering that mission to.
Yeah. Mark, we just got a question from one of our listeners here, Bill Snow, and he said, what are your thoughts on the effectiveness of third-party appointment setters during this COVID time? Should we reset the expectation?
Oh man, this one opens up Pandora's box, because for some businesses, for some entities, it works. It works very well, but it has to be one that third-party company can really communicate well. Can they understand it? Can they articulate it? Many times a small business owner really doesn't have the ability to get somebody else to do their heavy lifting, because it's them, it's their personality, it's who they are. So it's really going to vary. I know you've used some third-party people. Why don't you?
Yeah, Bill, this is a great question because it's right up my alley. I have gone back and forth with third party. I have had very bad experiences, and then I've had a really good experience. So here's my opinion on it. Number one is Mark is nailing it 100%. You really need to choose a third party who is articulate and who is sales trained. The other thing is I only use third parties to set the appointments. I insist that I close the deal because nobody can sell me better than I can sell me. And that's a very difficult lift to try to train somebody else to sell you. But you also need to insist that the third party records those calls, that you listen in on occasion, and you're meeting with them on a weekly basis to really determine how many calls they're making, what's turning into appointments, what's working and what isn't working. And please point that third party appointment setter at your target market. The better your list, the better chance they're going to have of setting an appointment for you.
And that really takes us very well into the topic here in just a moment, because it's so easy to measure the numbers, but it's the process behind the numbers that count. So with that, why don't we jump into the topic, which is sales goals. What are the right things to measure? And what should salespeople not pay attention to?
Yeah. So, gosh, you and I both build a lot of sales strategies for companies. And I've got to tell you, one of the things that I am most passionate about and where I begin every sales strategy is truly with measuring behaviors. It's kind of like what we were talking with in our sales question is the first thing you've got to do is define what your sales process is. Now, that may sound so elementary, but I'm just shocked at how many companies I start to work with, and they have a sales process, but not a defined, written down, well articulated sales process. And once you know that sales process, then it's the actions to get to that sales process. You know, where do you network? How many sales calls do you make? How many sales follow-up calls do you make? How many, how do you track and measure that? And then measuring those behaviors all along the way.
You know, I'll also say that, hey, just because you can measure it doesn't mean it's worth measuring. And I find so many times for sales goals. In fact, I was talking with a sales VP the other day, and he said, wow, we're finally going to drop our social media goals in terms of the number of new connections people make on LinkedIn. And I go, thank you.
Yeah.
What a stupid measurement. Because here's the whole thing. If you set a number out there, and you know what? Salespeople are always going to go after it. So be careful what you ask your salespeople to do. Here's one of the big things that I look for. It's not the number of calls somebody makes in a day. Oh, you're charged with making 50 dials a day, or 65 contacts a day. It's the number of quality conversations. That's one of the pieces that I want to measure. I mean, that's an intermediate sales goal, that the number of quality conversations. And what's the definition of a quality conversation? Am I gleaning new information out of that person? And am I securing a next step? It's not rocket science. But if I'm meeting those two pieces, then I'm having a quality call. That's something I want to measure, not the total number of calls.
This is such a great conversation and a great topic, because so often as salespeople, we think that we're being measured so that we're proving something to our managers. But that is not why you track and measure. You track and measure because you are your best sales coach, and you learn what's working and what isn't working. So the point that Mark made is so right. I mean, let's go back to the networking piece. Don't track the number of networking events you attend, because I don't really care if you're going to the Lions Club if your ideal client isn't at the Lions Club. It doesn't count. It doesn't amount for anything. There's no cookie for being the biggest networker in town. There's a cookie for how many times you attended a networking event and you turned that into a lead. Howdy doody calls are something you should not measure either. Back in the day when I started in corporate banking, we were required to make X amount of sales calls. And we found that so many of our bankers were just going out and consistently calling on their best customers. They would go see Frida every single week. Well, that doesn't count as a sales call. You track the sales calls where you literally got in front of your ideal client and you had a high quality conversation.
See, this brings up such a key point. It's not the quantity, it's the quality. And I am going to be much more likely to measure a quality 1 hour conversation with somebody. I'm going to place a lot more value on that than I am making 5 howdy doody calls. You're right. I mean, that is a no-brainer. Back there used to be an old joke when people were in their car making sales calls. It was called a radio call. A radio call was when you stopped to visit a customer. This applied in banking. There was a song on the radio, and you were in and out and back in your car, and that same song was still playing on the radio. That was called a radio call. And I'll tell you what, right? I mean, that is what a lot of phone calls do. So here's the whole thing. Should I be measuring something like voicemails I leave? No. I mean, yeah, it's okay, but what am I doing with them? Again, it comes down to the quality. Am I getting a callback? Am I ultimately getting a response? Am I having a conversation?
Yeah. And again, I feel like the biggest piece I want you to take away from this is that understand you're tracking and measuring for yourself. You're not tracking and measuring to please a boss. I do think that social media can be tricky to measure. One of the things that I just did is I just downloaded all of my LinkedIn contacts, and I've gone through and I've really, on the suggestion of Bryn Tillman, and I've gone through and I've really cleaned all my contacts to really find some leads that I should follow up on and I should build deeper connections with. So I'm going to start to track some of my social media and really figuring out how often I'm connecting with my ideal client, how often that's turning into a relationship, and how often that's turning into an opportunity. But really getting granular on that, because it doesn't matter how many followers I have. It doesn't matter how big my email list is. It doesn't matter how many connections I have. I'm looking for that quality piece.
So that's why you're no longer connected with me on LinkedIn.
That's right. It was a waste of my time and energy.
I'm just beginning to get the memo on that. I am slow. See, now that brings up such an interesting piece. And of course, I've used this line, and it's an old line, but you can't take clicks and likes to the bank. And that's what I find so many times, that people will sit there and say, I'm going to spend X amount of time on social media and I'm going to get all these clicks. I'm going to get all these likes. You can't take them to the bank. Now, social media does create business. I get business. I've got several very nice pieces of business off of messages that have been sent to me by way of LinkedIn over the last month. And that's great. But social media has such a long tail. In other words, it takes a long time to nurture, to grow, and you will starve to death if you think that all you have to do is spray and pray. It doesn't work. It doesn't work with cold calling, and it doesn't work with social media. You can't spray and pray. So what would be the perfect goal you think an individual top performer should be measuring?
I think that, to me, the perfect thing that they really should be measuring if they want to hit their sales goals is, number one is quality conversations and then results. I mean, I'm looking for my behaviors. I'm tracking my behaviors, and then I'm looking at my results. If my behaviors are achieving my results, then the behaviors are correct. If they're not, I still put in a lot of effort, but somewhere in there, my behaviors are broken. So again, it's kind of like, if I wanted to get in shape, I might track the fact of what I eat and what I exercise. And if I'm on target, then I'll hit my desired health goal. If not, something may need to change in those behaviors. But if I were only allowed to track one thing, I'd be tracking quality conversations with the ideal client.
That's great. I'm going to share three that I really like. It's not the number of leads I get into the top of my funnel, my pipeline, whatever. It's the number of leads I qualify. In other words, have these really measured up that they can be a viable customer. So I'm going to measure that. I'm going to measure then the percent that ultimately close. And I'm going to measure the length of time it takes, because the most valuable asset I have is my own time. Mm-hmm. So I want to be able to have a speed to close, to where from the moment I close the prospect, in other words, I validate that they're a prospect, they're no longer a suspect. What is the length of time to get them to close? And those are the three measurements that I really drill down on. So, hey, any final comments on that? Then we'll jump into the book and the lightning round.
No, just again, I just really want to reiterate, for anyone who's tuning in right now, please understand that tracking is one of the best things you can do for yourself. The goal is to become more efficient and more effective consistently at sales. You are your best sales coach.
Great. Hey, the book this week is a book that probably people know this gentleman's father, but they don't know him. And it's Tom Ziglar. It's kind of hard to see there. Tom Ziglar, Choose to Win. Now, you know that his father wrote the book Born to Win. Choose to Win kind of picks up on this. And here's the reason I like it. It's kind of an obscure book. I like Tom a lot. It really talks about what do the top 1%ers do. And anybody who follows me, you know that I spend a lot of time really honing in on that. But he really covers in there. So the book Choose to Win by Tom Ziglar. I like it. It's, again, actually, this copy was actually given to me personally by Tom. So I can't even say that I bought the book. He gave it to me. Anyway.
Yeah. I've not read it, but I tell you, I love that whole idea, because I love the message that winning's a choice. I think we really underestimate just how much control we have over our futures and our lives. And I love the idea of rather Born to Win. I love the fact that he picked it up and really put it in more empowering, is that it's a choice. It's based on the decisions that you make.
And I told Tom that. I said that word choose. You choose to win. And I think that's such a powerful word for all of us. And he goes through the book, shares a number of strategies from salespeople that he's had the privilege to connect with, to work with. Great book. So anyway, hey, with that, let's jump into the lightning round. Put your hands on the buzzer, and this goes fast. The lightning round, quick ways to measure progress and stay focused.
Again, schedule time. Make sure that you have time every single day to devote to sales and the sales process.
After you get done with your scheduled time, evaluate yourself. How did I do? Measure each individual segment of time that you give towards a specific task.
Never leave the office. Never shut it down without knowing who you're going to call on the next day. Do not waste time trying to think of people to call on, but close out at the end of the day, knowing the sales calls that you're going to follow up with the next day.
You always steal one from me. Always know what is the speed it's going to take you to close a sale. Measure speed from qualified lead to closing the sale.
Create the top 10 criteria that qualify a prospect for you. Are they the decision maker, geographic location, speed at which they want to make a decision, budget, and keep that on a graph. List your prospects there. And if they don't meet at least 70% of your criteria, move on to another prospect. Stay and work in your highest zone.
Measure and count the number of questions the prospect asks you during the selling phase.
Have a well-defined set of questions that you ask every prospect. I was just working with a client earlier this week who feels like she gets on the phone and it goes everywhere. You don't necessarily have to use a profiling tool or an interview tool, but define what you need to know about prospects. Create the open-ended questions to go with that and keep the sales call on track.
And be continually updating that list of questions. And as you develop your list of questions, develop a specific list for each ideal customer profile that you're going after. That way you always have a specific list. And as you measure them, as you evaluate them, you're continually tweaking them.
Yeah. Remember, the sale happens in the follow-up. Now, you knew that was going to come from me, but you need to track your follow-up system. You need to consistently put things into your customer relationship management system, and you need to work a 70-30 split. Follow-up should be 70% value add, 30% asking for the business, but you need to be consistent with that follow-up.
Measure the amount of business you get by way of repeat and referral, because that's a measurement of your selling process and how well you deliver against customer expectations. Why don't you share one more? I'll share one more, and then we'll kind of close it down.
Yeah, I would track my inbound leads and the quality of those inbound leads. That speaks directly to the thought leadership you're creating out there. And if it is falling off, you need to do more to create better thought leadership, and you need to map out that customer journey.
Whatever numbers you establish, you always got to make sure that you are continuing to ratchet them higher. Never be satisfied with where you are. You, as the book says, you choose to win. You choose to win by continually upping the score. Hey, with that, let's go ahead and shut it down this week. Another great show. Thank you for listening to Sales Logic this week. If you like what you hear, subscribe, rate, and review the show on your favorite podcast app. If something we've said has earned you a single dollar, consider telling a friend about our show. It's how we grow to help you grow. I'm Mark Hunter.
And I'm Meredith Elliott Powell.
Remember, when you sell with confidence and integrity,
uncertainty suddenly becomes your competitive advantage.
And the sale becomes logical.
All right. We will see you next week for another episode of Sales Logic. Don't forget, go to our website, saleslogicpodcast.com, or just put a question out there on social media with #SalesLogic.